They are meticulous. Jack Nicholson is nominated for 12 Oscars and an illustrious half-century career. However, his acting was not his greatest secret. It has to do with Ray, his son. People observed the striking similarity for decades. The same expression, the same ferocity, even the same unsettling smile. Re-engaged in combat. Against it, picking a profession other than performing. However, he eventually stopped in 2024 sprinting. Hollywood was astonished by his breakthrough performance. Additionally, Jack's recent admission of what he anticipated demonstrates that he was aware that this day would come. Along. Jack Nicholson had a secret from the start of his life that followed him for almost 40 years. He didn't suspect anything. He was born on April 22, 1937, in Neptune, New Jersey, into what appeared to be a typical household, but the reality was concealed by well-crafted lies. He was raised with the belief that Ethel May Nicholson was his mother, and his older sister, June Nicholson, had left home to pursue her ambitions of working in show business. Even his another sister, Aunt Lorraine, was introduced. Everyone cooperated. Extended family, friends, and neighbors. The quiet was never broken by anyone. The strategy had been predetermined before his birth. He was born to June in New York City, far away from Neptune, to keep the truth from anyone back home. It was an unsay deal that was in effect for 37 years. The deception's origin dates back to June was only 17. She got a job as an Elle Carroll after leaving Neptune for New York. Dancer, which at the time was a dazzling job for any young woman. However, she then got pregnant. The father was Don, a guy who had previously boyfriend who, decades later, would assert paternity. June's admission that she wasn't really sure exacerbated the scandal. Who was the father? Being an unmarried mother was socially disastrous in 1937. It might destroy entire futures, careers, and reputations. June returned home in embarrassment, handed up her child, and consented to spend the rest of her life as his sister. That secret remained hidden until 1974, after 15. Nicholson was 37 and writing high films in a short period of time, and having recently completed Chinatown. Time magazine was getting up for a big covering piece on him, verifying all of his personal information. During the procedure, strange gaps in the records were discovered by researchers. When Nicholson was called, he was told something he couldn't believe. It was possible that the man he believed to be his father was still alive. In reality, Ethel May June was his biological mother and his grandmother. The discovery was made just prior to the release of Chinatown, a film about unsettling family secrets. The irony was almost too good to be true. "A guy calls me," Nicholson remarked over the phone to his Uncle Shorty when he first heard it. "It informs me that my father is still living, that my mother wasn't Ethel May, and that June was my mum. I've never heard anything so messed up." Shorty initially denied it until acknowledging its veracity. By that time, both June and Ethel May had passed away. It would be impossible for Nicholson to question them about what they had done. Long before this, in 1955, Nicholson began his career in Hollywood as a man-clerk in the animation division of MGM. He was employed by Joseph and William Hanna. The men behind Tom and Jerry were Barbara. They even extended an offer to hire him as an animator, but he declined it. Rather, a fortunate occurrence in the mailroom led to his initial audition. On August 18, 1958, he made his big-screen debut, within The Crybaby Killer. He was 20 years old. The movie focused on a teenager who kidnaps a woman and child. It was reduced to just 1 hour and 21 minutes, and combined as a double feature with another movie. It was a box office failure and disappeared for several years, until making a comeback on DVD in 2006. Nicholson nearly drowned in 1963 while filming The Nightmare with Boris Karloff. The weight dragged him under while he was dressed in a bulky military outfit for an ocean scene. The film had begun. Was planned as a 2-day shot with unused sets, but it took 9 months with 5 distinct directors, due in part to its chaotic nature. It became a cult favorite. Manufacturing. Nicholson met Sandra, an actress on that same infamous project. Knight Jennifer. Their daughter was born in 1963. After their 1962 marriage, it lasted until 1968 and was his only marriage. There were several low-budget films throughout those years, frightening movies, and has trouble landing a consistent acting job. In 1967, he wrote the screenplay for the LSD-themed psychedelic movie The Trip, which gave him a needed money. He co-wrote Head for the Monkees the following year. These up until his breakthrough performance in Easy Rider in 1969. He was supported by projects. He never looked back after that. At the beginning of 1968, Rip Torn was seated opposite Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper in a restaurant in New York. They were discussing a recently released film. George Hansen's role, a lawyer intoxicated, had been composed specifically for Torn. However, in between drinks during small chat, Hopper began to rant about rednecks he had encountered while researching southern locations. Torn proud it wasn't taken lightly by Texans. The atmosphere became tense. The words became more incisive. Voice rose. Hopper then reached for a steak knife. Although no one was harmed, the harm was finished. On that night, Torn left the project. In 1994, years later, Hopper informed Jay Leno that Tor was the one who had drawn the knife. Tor was enraged. He cleared his identity, won almost $1 million, and took Hopper to court. However, his Jack Nicholson's gain was his loss. Nicholson took over after Torn left. Thepard would transform his life. George Hansen was portrayed by Nicholson with a high, noisy Texas drawl that turned into something memorable. The picture of him wearing a football cap, stealing the film from its own stars while drinking and smiling. He was 32 when his nomination for Best Supporting Actor was made public by the Academy. The film only cost $360,000 to produce. Here it was at the Oscars though. Nicholson had changed from being simply an artifice in low-budget motion pictures. Hollywood had to take him seriously all of a sudden. When Easy Rider debuted in theaters on July 14, 1969, it evolved into more than just a film. It was a mirror for a generation that is restless. Young Americans are abandoning customs. From conformity. From the Vietnam War. The Bridge was George Hansen by Nicholson. Between the counterculture and the traditional world. A man who belonged and understood both completely to neither. The movie inspired fashion, music, and lifestyle trends. It contributed to the beginning of the new Hollywood age, in which riskier, smaller enterprises could compete with major studio films. Additionally, Nicholson taught rebellion was now linked to face. Prior to this, he had been trapped in Little Roger Corman B films and TV parts, sometimes for a few $100s. Simply in a single summer, Rider altered that. The film brought in $60 million globally. For $1.7 million in the United States alone. Payrolls for Nicholson increased to $6. He said to his agency, "Your name," indicating that he now desired odd parts. Turns becomes a brand. You take on 31 different responsibilities and become Campbell's Soup. Individuals started drawing comparisons between him and James Dean and Marlon Brando. Nicholson did not merely appear in Simple Rider, he assisted in editing it after it was shot. Dennis Hopper spent 80 horse and prost video that needed to be turned into a narrative. Nicholson concentrated on the components. Following the arrival of his persona, along with editor Henry Jargum, that it was uncommon for a supporting actor to be thus involved. It provided Nicholson with an intimate look at the process of filmmaking, information that might be useful to him in upcoming years. In 1975, easy pieces followed. Robert Dupia, portrayed by Nicholson, was a former pianist who was unable to hide among oil workers. Suitable for any location. To him it was personal. Some referred to it as a breakthrough for characters who are men. Men on screen rarely shown such unbridled emotion. The movie received 4 nominations for Oscars, including one for Best Actor for Nicholson. A single scener turned into a legend. Dupe places an order for toast in a diner after a string of ridiculous rappellants. Reiterating a genuine disagreement Nicholson had at a Sunset years prior restaurant on a strip. Carnal Knowledge was released in 1971. Mike Nichols' audacious and frank examination of aging, sex, and frustration. Over 25, Nicholson portrayed Jonathan. Years. From confident college student to resentful, helpless man. The words were startling for its time. The part was one of his top 3 performances. The final detail followed. Nicholson played Billy Badass Badusky in 1973. A young seaman who stole $40 from a charity was escorted to prison by a Navy lifer. Box. After accounting for inflation, it came to almost $277. Nicholson gave the role a streak of benevolence, comedy, and rebellion, receiving his 3rd consecutive Oscar nomination. In 1974, Chinatown came next, and it was an artistic achievement. Nicholson portrayed Jake Gittes, a private investigator discovering a network of family secrets and deceit. The movie received a nomination for 11 Oscars. There were pyrotechnics on the set. Nicholson, a loyal Lakers supporter when a game went into double overtime. A fan once held the entire crew waiting for more than an hour. Basketball disinterested Roman Polanski barged into his trailer, snatched the television and tossed it outside. Nevertheless, the suspense seemed to drive the movie. Jack Nicholson wasn't only Randall, he lived him, McMurray. He entered a real mental facility to get ready, and remained long enough to sense the walls closing up around them. He closely examined patients, observing their movements, their twitches, and their speech when no one was around. He listened to the morning's gloomy calm and the ward's little noises at night, weeks after being inside. The distinction between reality and performance became so hazy that Nicholson himself started to wonder what sanity actually meant. Crew members observed that when the cameras stopped, he didn't always leave McMurphy behind. Even when taking a break, that he was surrounded by erratic energy, as though the character had moved in and locked its doorway. By March 29, 1976, the risk had been profitable. On the 48th, Nicholson eventually won his first Oscar for Finest Actor at the Academy Awards, following for prior nominations. For less than a minute, he stood on stage and smiled, saying, "I suppose this demonstrates that the school has just as many nuts as any other place." The McMurphy moment was ideal, swift, irreverent, and unforgettable. By defeating some of the most formidable opponents the Best Actor category had ever encountered, he solidified his position as one of the greats. However, it was more difficult to leave McMurphy behind than to earn the statue. Even when Nicholson was not on site, friends and relatives noticed glimmers of the persona. There was appeal, but there was also brink. McMurphy was erratic. He may grin one moment and attempt to next strangle someone. That gloom permeated Nicholson's personal demeanor, making it difficult to distinguish between the role and the guy. Those near he started to fear that the clash and rebellion weren't merely for the movie. No longer the movie itself turned into a phenomenon. It made more than $18 million in the United States after its November 20th, 1975 release. States with only a $3 million budget. It rose to the second highest earning, second only to Jaws, as the year's best film. It accomplished something at the Oscars that only won all 5 major honors, something no other movie in history had ever accomplished: Finest Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, and Best Screenplay Adaptation. Furthermore, MC Murphy never truly left Nicholson either. The position served as the template for a number of his best performances. Parts of Jack Torrance's and McMurphy's insanity were visible in The Shining, Ina Fugedman's savage disobedience, and even in Melvin Uddy's jagged edges. As good as it gets as a doll, he emerged as the most charismatic outlaw on the screen. A man who could enchant you while demolishing everything in his path. McMurphy had permanently altered his career, and perhaps he was also altered in certain ways. Obsessiveness was a well-known trait of Stanley Kubrick, although that fixation became a lasting memory for the actors and crew of The Shining. People discussed a sequence where Jack Nicholson cuts through is said to have required over 400 takes. The door to the bathroom, though marginally different, the truth is still quite harsh. That 60 actual doors were destroyed in a scenario that took 3 days to shoot. Kubrick desired excellence. Nicholson was forced to spend hours at a time in a state of complete insanity. The filmmaker persisted in using one, keeping the question in mind: how can we surpass the previous record in this regard? This was not an isolated incident. The Guinness World Record for the most takes in a single scene was even broken by Kubrick. A scene in the kitchen was recorded 148 times. Nicholson referred to the entire procedure as his career's most frustrating experience. It wasn't only the never-ending repetition. Kubrick refused to accept substitutes. Nicholson was required to be present during lighting arrangements as well, which maintained his tense mood. The pressure permeated his portrayal, giving Jack Torrance a horrifyingly authentic sense. And then came the statement that would go down in horror history as the most well-known: "This Johnny wasn't in the script or Stephen King's book." Nicholson tugged Ed McMahon used to announce Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. It had been heard in a familiar and comfortable setting by millions of Americans, but Nicholson transferred it into a frightening image. Kubrick nearly removed it from the movie. However, he knew it was too strong to lose when he glimpsed it through the fractured wood. The line was no longer a part of Carson Johnny. It belonged to the horror genre. There was a lot of life on set. The Nicholson sat times. The combination of Kubrick's mind games and method acting made the atmosphere feel uncomfortable. Prior to takes, Nicholson would work himself into a rage, pace, and swing the axe. Shelley Duvall's hair began to come out due to extreme stress. She on set displayed clusters of it to Kubrick in her palms. Kubrick purposefully brought her to tears. Thinking that the only dread that would appear on film would be genuine. Nicholson's fury was so convincing, whether acting or real, that crew members occasionally became concerned about what they were witnessing. However, Kubrick made sure to safeguard one person on the scene at all costs. 6-year-old Danny Lloyd, the youngster, had no idea that he was in a scary film. Kubrick informed him that they were putting together a family drama. When a scenario appeared scary, they swapped out the performers for life-size enemies to prevent anything frightening from being seen by Lloyd. All he saw was heavily edited video that doesn't contain any scary scenes. As a youngster, years later, he had lascared the twins he had played with were ghosts after seeing the entire film. His father in the movie was attempting to murder him with an axe. As for Nicholson, taking this was a dangerous role. He had already won an Oscar for One Flew in 1980. Only a few years later, he would win again for Terms of Endearment, this time for Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Horror wasn't taken into account. Serious art. It was frequently viewed as lowbrow entertainment by critics. The Shining received poor reviews and was even nominated for Worst Actress and Worst Director. Some believed that Nicholson thought his performance was excessive. It eventually became his most famous role, demonstrating that horror might have the same impact as any drama. The narrative of it would be impossible to discuss Nicholson's career without mentioning Angelica Houston. There, the 17-year romance started at his birthday celebration on Mulholland Drive in 1973. Houston, 22, had just returned from London and was already enamored with Nicholson after observing Easy Rider, the bad boy of Hollywood. He was 36. They performed a dance through the night, yet there were indications of trouble even in those early days. Days later, Nicholson had to meet his ex, so he cancelled their first date plans. That started to happen frequently. They starred in her 1985 film Pretty's Honor. John Huston, Father, a dark comedy concerning mob assassins. It featured the main characters are Nicholson and Kathleen Turner, while the mobster started the film made $26 million, although it cost $16 million to make. It was Angelica won Best Supporting Actress, and was nominated for 8 Oscars. For a moment their personal and professional lives were in harmony at that point, their actual chemistry illuminating the screen. When Nicholson began having an affair in 1989, that came to an end. Meets 18-year-old Rebecca Browsard, a former waiter who became a model. 2 of Browsard's children, Lorraine in 1990 and Ray in 1992, would be born, Huston learned while they were still dating. Nicholson didn't break up with her and assumed that life would continue, continuing as before. In Hollywood it was a well-known secret, and the humiliation was crushing. The ping-pong paddle controversy followed. Tabloids published a vivid report, specifics of Nicholson's paddle-related sexual encounter with a younger woman. It was worse because of the timing. The news of Browsard's pregnancy had just reached Huston. This went beyond simple treachery. It was humiliation in public. At last, Huston lost it. She barged into Nicholson's workspace and proceeded to physically attack him, releasing rage that had been suppressed for almost 20 years. Nicholson remained calm. Back. Later on he said that he thought he earned it. Huston even expressed gratitude to him. For allowing her to strike him. And that was all. The bachelor from Hollywood who had, after years of emotional abuse, he was eventually forced to face the repercussions of mocking the idea of marrying her. Jack. In terms of adoration, Nicholson was already a Hollywood legend when he played Garrett Breitler. However, he wasn't the insane mastermind or the dangerous rebel this time. He was an elderly astronaut, a brazen charmer who unintentionally fell in love with Aurora Greenway by Shirley Milan. His allure persisted, but so wasn't it. A gentleness that audiences had never saw in him before. The movie broke box office records, bringing in $165 million worldwide, and standing at only behind the second biggest hit of 1983, Return of the Jedi. At the Oscars it received 5 awards, including Best Picture, and received 11 nominations. Nicholson's personal victory for Best Supporting Actor demonstrated to the public his ability to flourish in a group setting. Romantic drama, while maintaining control of the stage with a cunning joke about his success. Nicholson appeared in a courtroom 9 years later, donning Colonel Jessup's uniform, prepared to utter a sentence that will reverberate throughout popular culture for all time. He didn't simply yell, "You can't handle the truth," in A Few Good Men. Set it off. Rob Reiner, the director, shot it from every perspective.